Imagine a time when giants walked the earth, mingling with humans and changing the course of history. Today, we'll dive into the true story of the Nephilim, uncovering the mysteries of Goliath and his brothers like you've never seen before. The Nephilim, a fascinating and often mysterious theme in biblical narratives, appear in the book of Genesis, specifically in chapter 6. Described as powerful giants and formidable warriors, the Nephilim emerged during a period of great corruption on earth. The term Nephilim comes from Hebrew and is often translated as fallen ones, or those who cause others to fall. Their origin is directly associated with the so-called sons of God and the daughters of men. These sons of God are interpreted by many theologians as fallen angels, celestial beings who disobeyed God's orders and descended to earth. The disobedience of these angels resulted in their union with human women, producing a hybrid offspring, the Nephilim. This forbidden union between celestial beings and mortals is a central point in the narrative, highlighting the mix of the divine with the human and the consequences of this transgression. The Nephilim are described as giants, possessing extraordinary strength and superhuman abilities. Imagine beings of enormous stature like the heroes of mythological stories found in various cultures around the world. They were not just large in size, but also in influence and power. These giants roamed the earth, dominating and influencing humanity in ways that challenge our modern understanding. The presence of the Nephilim intensified the evil and violence in the world, increasing the already existing corruption. God, observing the growing depravity caused by the existence of the Nephilim, decided to intervene drastically. This period of extreme moral decay culminated in the divine decision to send the flood, a catastrophic deluge intended to cleanse the earth. This first mention of the Nephilim shows us how their origins are deeply intertwined with the darkest events in biblical history. The blend of the celestial with the earthly, the sacred with the profane, creates a rich and complex narrative that unfolds with monumental consequences for humanity. And the rise of the Nephilim is, therefore, a prelude to one of God's harshest judgments on earth, highlighting the severity of the corruption they helped foster. The fallen angels, also known as the sons of God, are enigmatic figures who play a crucial role in the origin of the Nephilim. In biblical theology, these fallen angels are celestial beings who disobeyed God, descended to earth, and united with the daughters of men. This disobedience is a recurring theme in various religious traditions, where powerful beings challenge the divine order and face the consequences of their actions. In the Bible, especially in the book of Enoch, an apocryphal text, these angels are described in detail. They are led by a powerful figure named Azazel or Samyaza, who convinces other angels to rebel against God. This group of angels, known as the Watchers, sees the beauty of human women and, driven by desire, decides to abandon their heavenly positions to join them on earth. The union between these angels and human women was not just a moral transgression, but also a violation of natural and divine laws. From this union, the Nephilim were born, hybrid beings with superhuman characteristics. The presence of these giants on earth brought great chaos and destruction, increasing corruption and violence. The impact of the fallen angels goes beyond merely creating the Nephilim. They taught humanity various forbidden knowledge, such as the making of weapons, the practice of witchcraft, and other hidden secrets. This knowledge, which was supposed to remain unknown to humans, accelerated the moral and spiritual degradation of society. The story of the fallen angels is therefore a narrative of pride and downfall. They challenged the divine order, sought power and pleasure in the material world, and as a result were severely punished. The Bible mentions that God, in his wrath, imprisoned these angels in deep abysses, awaiting the day of final judgment. The punishment of these angels serves as a reminder of divine justice and the importance of following God's commands. The union of the sons of God with the daughters of men marks a crucial point in the biblical narrative about the Nephilim. This event is not just a union between celestial beings and mortals, but also a transgression that profoundly alters the course of humanity. In the book of Genesis, this union is described briefly, but its impact is immense. The sons of God are often interpreted as fallen angels, while the daughters of men represent human women. This forbidden union resulted in the birth of the Nephilim, giants of great stature and power. This hybrid offspring not only inherited the strength and superhuman abilities of their celestial parents, but also brought with them a moral corruption that quickly spread across the earth. The biblical description of this union suggests a violation of natural and divine orders. These angels, driven by desire and pride, descended to earth and united with women, creating a race of giants that spread violence and chaos. This transgression is seen as a grave act of disobedience, breaking the boundaries established by God between the celestial and the earthly. The consequences of this union were catastrophic. The Nephilim, with their immense strength and superhuman capabilities, began to dominate the earth, imposing their power over humans. Violence and depravity increased exponentially, creating an environment where evil spread uncontrollably. The earth, already corrupted by the presence of the Nephilim, became a place of chaos and disorder. This union also had a profound impact on the spirituality and morality of humanity. The forbidden knowledge passed on by the fallen angels, such as the making of weapons and occult practices, accelerated moral decay. The corrupting influence of the Nephilim and their celestial parents led humanity to a state of extreme degradation, where divine values were completely subverted. Faced with this desperate situation, God decided to intervene drastically. The decision to send the flood was a direct response to the corruption and violence spread by the Nephilim and the forbidden knowledge passed on by the fallen angels. This divine intervention aimed to purify the earth, eradicating evil and restoring order and justice. The giant offspring resulting from the union of fallen angels with the daughters of men brought the Nephilim into existence, beings of colossal stature and superhuman abilities. These creatures, mentioned enigmatically in the book of Genesis, stand out not only for their size, but also for their role as agents of corruption and violence on earth. The Nephilim were giants, both literally and figuratively. Described as men of renown and heroes of old, they possessed unusual strength and abilities that surpassed those of ordinary humans. Imagine beings as tall as trees, with the strength of dozens of men, capable of feats that would seem magical to any observer. This description parallels various mythologies around the world, where giants often play similar roles of power and destruction. The physical characteristics of the Nephilim made them both feared and revered. They were formidable warriors, and their presence inspired both fear and admiration. In an era where brute strength was one of the main factors of survival and domination, the Nephilim quickly stood out, exerting an overwhelming influence over the human populations around them. But it wasn't just their strength that made them notable. The Nephilim also inherited forbidden knowledge and abilities from the fallen angels. They knew how to forge weapons from metal, understood secrets of magic, and had a deep understanding of natural elements, which they used for their own benefit and to dominate humans. This advanced knowledge exacerbated the inequality between them and humans, further extending their dominance. The presence of the Nephilim on Earth had a devastating impact. They spread violence and depravity, acting as catalysts for widespread corruption. Their actions and influences led humanity to extreme levels of wickedness and disorder. Society, already fragile, began to crumble under the weight of the tyranny and oppression exerted by these giants. Faced with this situation, God observed the earth and saw that wickedness had multiplied alarmingly. The corruption was so deep that it required divine intervention to restore order. The decision to send the flood, a cataclysm intended to cleanse the earth of its corruption, was directly influenced by the presence and actions of the Nephilim. God's reaction to the corruption spread by the Nephilim was of such magnitude that it affected all of creation. When God looked at the earth, he saw that human wickedness had greatly increased and that every inclination of the human heart was only evil all the time. The presence of the Nephilim, with their violence and dominance, made the situation even worse, making the moral and spiritual decay of the world unbearable. Seeing this, God deeply regretted creating humanity and decided to cleanse the earth of its corruption through the flood. This act of divine justice is one of the most significant and cataclysmic events described in the Bible. The flood was not only a response to the disobedience of the fallen angels and the hybrid offspring of the Nephilim, but also a necessary intervention to restore holiness and order to creation. The decision to send the flood marked a point of no return. God chose Noah, a righteous and blameless man in his generation, to be the instrument of salvation for humanity and all forms of life on earth. Noah received detailed instructions to build an ark, a large ship capable of housing his family, and a pair of each animal species. This ark would be the refuge during the flood, ensuring the preservation of life and the continuity of creation after the purification. Noah's building of the ark is an example of unwavering obedience and faith. During the time Noah worked on the ark, he likely faced mockery and disbelief from his contemporaries, who couldn't understand the gravity of the situation or the imminence of divine judgment. However, Noah persisted, guided by divine instruction and the certainty of God's justice. When the ark was ready and the animals were gathered, the rain began to fall. The waters rose, covering the entire earth, and all living beings not in the ark perished. This flood was a powerful demonstration of divine justice, eliminating the corruption and violence that had infected creation. The Nephilim, with their extraordinary strength and abilities, were no match for the power of God's judgment. After 40 days and 40 nights of rain, the waters finally began to recede. The ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, and Noah, his family, and the animals emerged into a purified world. God established a new covenant with Noah, symbolized by the rainbow, promising never again to destroy the earth with a flood. The flood not only cleansed the earth of corruption and evil, but also marked the end of the Nephilim as a dominant force among humanity. When the waters rose and covered the earth, all living beings outside the ark were wiped out, including these hybrid giants. The fall of the Nephilim is thus closely tied to this divine cataclysm, which aimed to restore order and holiness to creation. The impact of the flood was devastating. The entire earth was submerged, and the force of the waters destroyed everything in their path. The Nephilim, with all their strength and power, couldn't withstand God's judgment. Their giant bodies were swept away by the torrents, their cities demolished, and their names erased from history, except in the memories and stories that followed. Despite the magnitude of the flood, there are hints that some remnants of the Nephilim endured. After the flood, the Bible refers to giants in various passages. These remnants, descendants of the original Nephilim, appeared at different times and places, casting the shadow of their former influence. In the post-flood period, the earth began to regenerate, and Noah and his family repopulated the world. Over time, new nations emerged, and the memory of the Nephilim became a legend, a cautionary tale about corruption and disobedience. However, giants still posed a real threat in certain regions, especially in the land of Canaan. Biblical accounts in the books of Numbers, Deuteronomy, and Joshua mention the presence of giants after the flood, indicating that some Nephilim or their descendants somehow survived. These accounts describe the Anakim, a race of giants who lived in Canaan, and other groups like the Emim and the Rephaim. These giants became formidable adversaries for the Israelites, who, under the leadership of Moses and later Joshua, faced these tribes in the conquest of the Promised Land. The continued presence of giants after the flood suggests that the corruption of the fallen angels left a lasting mark on humanity. Although the flood was a necessary purification, it didn't completely eradicate the influence of the Nephilim. These remnants served as reminders of days of decadence and violence, reinforcing the need to remain faithful to God's commands and avoid the temptations that led to the original fall. After the flood, humanity began to rebuild and repopulate the earth. Noah and his descendants gave rise to new nations, and the world gradually recovered from the cataclysm that had purified corruption. However, the presence of giants wasn't completely eliminated. The post-flood era saw the return of giants, known as the descendants of the Nephilim, who continued to exert significant influence in various regions. Among the most notorious of these remnants were the Anakim, a race of giants who lived in the land of Canaan. When Moses sent spies to explore Canaan, they returned with alarming reports about the presence of giants in the land, describing them as men of great stature. The sight of these giants instilled fear among the Israelites, leading them to doubt their ability to conquer the land promised by God. In addition to the Anakim, other tribes of giants, such as the Emim and the Rephaim, also inhabited the region. These tribes were known for their immense strength and size, and their fortified cities were feared by all neighboring nations. The presence of these giant tribes was a constant challenge for the Israelites, who, under Joshua's leadership, faced these threats during the conquest of Canaan. The battle against the giants was not just a physical fight, but also a spiritual one. The Israelites, guided by their faith in God, faced these formidable adversaries with courage and determination. The victory over the giants was not just a military achievement, but also a testament to God's faithfulness to his promises and the need to trust him even in the face of the greatest challenges. One of the most notable episodes involving the fight against giants is the battle against Og, the king of Bashan. Described as one of the last of the Rephaim, Og was a giant of impressive stature. His iron bed, mentioned in the Bible, was over 13 feet long, highlighting his colossal size. Despite his strength, Og was defeated by the Israelites, a feat that symbolized the supremacy of divine power over the brute strength of giants. These episodes show that even after the flood, humanity continued to face significant challenges in the form of giants. The persistence of these creatures underscores the idea that the struggle between good and evil is ongoing, and that faith and obedience to God are essential to overcoming adversities. Over time, references to giants began to diminish, indicating that the giant tribes were gradually defeated or assimilated by surrounding nations. However, their stories remained as legends and warnings about the importance of following divine precepts and resisting the temptation of corruption. The land of Canaan, a place of promises and challenges for the Israelites, became the stage for epic confrontations between God's people and the descendants of the Nephilim. When the Israelites approached the Promised Land, they discovered that Canaan was inhabited by various powerful tribes, including giants descended from the ancient Nephilim. The Anakim, one of the most feared tribes, were known for their colossal stature and immense strength. When Moses sent 12 spies to explore Canaan, they returned with disturbing reports about these giants. 10 of the spies, terrified by the sight of the Anakim, described themselves as grasshoppers in comparison, inciting panic and disbelief among the Israelites. Only 2 spies, Joshua and Caleb, showed faith in God's promise, insisting that with his help, the land could be conquered despite the obstacles. The presence of the Anakim and other giant tribes, such as the Emim and the Rephaim, made the conquest of Canaan a daunting task. These tribes were not only physically imposing, but also occupied fortified cities, making any direct confrontation a dangerous endeavor. However, under Joshua's leadership, the Israelites trusted in God's promises and advanced with determination. Joshua, as both a military and spiritual leader, led the Israelites in a series of battles that tested their faith and courage. One of the most notable confrontations was against Hebron, a city inhabited by descendants of giants. With unwavering faith and divinely inspired strategies, Joshua and his men managed to capture the city, eliminating the Anakim who lived there. This victory was symbolic, representing the overcoming of their greatest fears and reaffirming God's faithfulness to his promises. Besides Hebron, other regions of Canaan also housed giants. The Israelites faced and defeated various giant tribes, each victory reinforcing their faith and certainty that God was with them. The battles were not just military conquests, but also spiritual affirmations of God's supremacy over any force or entity, no matter how powerful it seemed. Despite the victories, the presence of giants in the land of Canaan served as a constant reminder of the ancient days of corruption and disobedience. The remnants of the Nephilim, with their impressive physical strength, symbolized the persistence of evil and the continuous need for vigilance and obedience to God. The accounts of these battles and confrontations were passed down through generations, reinforcing the narrative that faith and obedience to God are essential to overcoming the most formidable challenges. The stories of the giants of Canaan became an integral part of the cultural and spiritual heritage of the Israelites, teaching the importance of trusting in God, even when facing seemingly invincible enemies. Among the descendants of the Nephilim, Goliath is undoubtedly the most famous. Described in detail in the book of 1 Samuel, Goliath of Gath was a Philistine warrior of impressive stature and immense strength. His story has become one of the most emblematic episodes in the Bible, symbolizing the battle between good and evil, faith and disbelief, and human power against divine power. Goliath was a giant, about 9 feet tall. He wore a bronze armor that weighed around 125 pounds and carried a spear with a tip weighing about 15 pounds. The detailed description of his armor and weapons highlights not only his physical strength, but also the intimidation he exerted over his opponents. The Philistines, constant enemies of the Israelites, were camped at Soko in Judah's territory. Every day, for 40 days, Goliath would come out from the Philistine camp to challenge the Israelites, mocking and ridiculing their faith in God. His challenge was clear. He proposed a single combat where he would fight an Israelite champion, deciding the fate of the two nations in one battle. The fear Goliath instilled was palpable. None of the Israelite warriors dared to face him. Then David, a young shepherd anointed by Samuel to become the future king of Israel, entered the scene. Sent to the battlefield to bring provisions to his brothers, David heard Goliath's challenges and was outraged by the provocations against the army of the living God. David, moved by unwavering faith in God, volunteered to face Goliath. Though dismissed for his youth and inexperience, David trusted that God, who had helped him defeat lions and bears while protecting his sheep, would help him overcome the giant. Armed only with his sling and 5 smooth stones from the stream, David faced Goliath without fear. The battle between David and Goliath was quick and decisive. As Goliath advanced with his sword, David ran to meet him and, with a single precise movement, launched a stone that struck Goliath's forehead, causing him to fall face first to the ground. David then took Goliath's own sword and decapitated him, securing victory for the Israelites. Goliath's defeat had a profound impact. The Philistines, seeing their champion dead, fled in despair, and the Israelites pursued and defeated them. This victory was not just military, but also spiritual. It showed that faith in God overcomes any challenge, no matter how insurmountable it seems. David, the young shepherd, became a national hero and eventually Israel's most beloved king. Goliath's story also gives us insight into his brothers, mentioned in other biblical texts. They were also giants and formidable warriors, facing the Israelites in subsequent battles. However, David's victory over Goliath served as a powerful symbol that the brute strength and violence of giants could not prevail against faith and divine justice. Goliath's challenge was a crucial moment in the history of the Israelites. The Philistine giant stood out on the battlefield, not just for his height and strength, but for the boldness of his daily taunts. For 40 days, Goliath stood before the Israelite army, issuing a challenge that echoed through the valley of Elah, mocking the God of Israel and daring any Israelite warrior to face him in single combat. Goliath wasn't just looking for an opponent. He was trying to demoralize and dominate the Israelites through fear. His strategy was clear. By challenging an Israelite champion to a direct fight, he sought to resolve the conflict between the two nations quickly and decisively. The proposal was simple. If Goliath won, the Israelites would become servants of the Philistines, but if he was defeated, the Philistines would submit to Israel. This was a common tactic in ancient warfare, where individual combats could decide the fate of entire nations. During these 40 days of challenges, fear and demoralization spread through the Israelite camp. None of the soldiers, including King Saul himself, had the courage to face the giant. It was in this setting that David, a young shepherd sent by his father to bring provisions to his brothers, arrived at the battlefield. David, upon hearing Goliath's taunts, was outraged at the insult to God's army. Driven by unwavering faith and deep trust in the Lord, he volunteered to face the giant. Initially, David was ridiculed and underestimated, both by his brothers and by Saul. However, his determination and faith spoke volumes. Eventually, Saul gave in and allowed David to face Goliath, albeit reluctantly. Preparing for the fight, David refused the armor and weapons offered by Saul. He knew his strength didn't lie in battle gear, but in his trust in God. Armed only with his sling and 5 smooth stones from the stream, David approached Goliath with a courage that seemed reckless to human eyes. Seeing David approach, Goliath mocked him, cursing and promising to give his flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. But David responded with a powerful declaration of faith, stating that he came in the name of the Lord of hosts and that the battle belonged to the Lord. This verbal exchange between David and Goliath is one of the most dramatic moments in the story, highlighting the contrast between the giant's arrogance and the humble confidence of the young shepherd. When the battle began, David didn't hesitate. He ran towards Goliath, took a stone from his bag, placed it in his sling, and launched it with deadly precision. The stone struck Goliath in the forehead, sinking into his skull and knocking him to the ground. David then ran to the fallen giant, took Goliath's own sword, and decapitated him, securing victory for Israel. Goliath's defeat was a deeply resonant event, not just among the Philistines and Israelites, but in the entire biblical history. This episode wasn't just a military victory, but also a spiritual triumph that showed the supremacy of divine power over brute strength. After the stone David launched hit Goliath in the forehead, the giant fell with a thud. This sound echoed through the valley, momentarily freezing both armies, who watched in disbelief at what had just happened. The sight of the fallen giant was shocking, as he seemed invincible, a force of nature no ordinary man could face. Without wasting time, David ran to Goliath, took the giant's own sword, and completed his victory by decapitating him. Raising Goliath's head, David proclaimed God's victory over the Philistines. This brave and decisive act was a powerful symbol that faith in God is the true source of strength and victory. Goliath's death caused panic and confusion among the Philistines. Once confident in their champion's strength, they now fled in disarray. The Israelite army, inspired by David's courage and encouraged by divine intervention, chased the Philistines to Gath and Ekron, inflicting heavy losses and securing a crushing victory. This pursuit and defeat of the Philistines not only secured the immediate win, but also weakened the Philistines' position in the region for a long time. For the Israelites, Goliath's defeat had profound significance. It not only boosted the army's morale, but also strengthened the people's faith in God. David, who entered the battlefield as a young shepherd, emerged as a national hero. His faith and courage became an inspiration to all Israelites, showing that trust in God can lead to seemingly impossible victories. This victory also marked the beginning of David's political rise. His reputation quickly grew, and he gained the favor of King Saul and the people. However, this victory also sowed the seeds of future rivalry between Saul and David, as Saul began to see David as a potential threat to his throne. Despite the tensions that would develop, Goliath's defeat solidified David's role as a God-chosen leader destined to rule Israel. Goliath's defeat is remembered as a classic example of how faith and courage can overcome physical strength and intimidation. This story is often cited to illustrate the power of trust in God and the importance of facing challenges with determination and faith. Goliath, the invincible giant, fell not to a greater force, but to the unwavering faith of a young shepherd who believed in God's power. Goliath's brothers, also descendants of the Nephilim, continued to be a significant threat to Israel after the giant's death. These formidable warriors, mentioned in various biblical books, kept alive the memory of the Nephilim's power and presence on earth. The Bible gives us details about their identities and their battles against the Israelites, highlighting the persistence of evil and the constant need for courage and faith. One of Goliath's brothers was Lami, mentioned in 1 Chronicles 20, verse 5. Like his brother Goliath, Lami was a fearsome warrior. In a battle against the Philistines, Lami was killed by Elhanan, one of David's mighty warriors. This victory was another symbol of the Israelites' ongoing struggle against the remnants of the Nephilim and the divine protection that ensured their victory. Another giant, identified in 2 Samuel 21 or 16:22, was Ishbi-Benob, who was also a descendant of the giants and tried to kill David in a battle. However, Abishai, David's nephew, intervened and killed Ishbi-Benob, saving David and reaffirming divine protection over the king and his people. This episode highlighted the loyalty of David's warriors and the importance of unity and courage in the face of challenges. Besides Lami and Ishbi-Benob, there is mention of other giants in Gath, including a warrior with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, totaling 24 digits. This giant was confronted and killed by Jonathan, David's nephew. The presence of such unusual physical features underscores the extraordinary nature of these Nephilim descendants, making their defeats even more impressive. The battles against Goliath's brothers and other giants were not just physical confrontations, but also spiritual ones that tested the Israelites' faith and determination. Each victory against these giants reinforced the belief that, despite appearances and physical strength, God's power was supreme and capable of securing victory against any adversary. These stories of confrontations and victories also served as constant reminders to the Israelites of the need to remain faithful to God and courageous in the face of danger. The fights against the giants, led by David and his warriors, exemplify the perseverance and faith needed to overcome the challenges that threatened Israel's peace and security. The gradual elimination of the giants symbolized the reduction of the Nephilim's influence and the restoration of divine order on earth. Each defeat not only removed a physical threat, but also diminished the legacy of corruption and violence that these giants represented. The persistence and victories of the Israelites helped consolidate peace and establish a stronger foundation for the future kingdom of Israel. The wars against the giants, descendants of the Nephilim, were an intense and crucial period in Israelite history. These battles weren't just fights for territory, but had deep spiritual and cultural significance. The victory over these giants symbolized the supremacy of faith in God over the brute strength and corruption that the Nephilim represented. After the death of Goliath and his brothers, the Israelites faced several other tribes of giants living in the region. One of these tribes was the Rephaim, mentioned in various Bible passages as inhabitants of the areas around Bashan. Og, the king of Bashan, was one of the most notorious giants of this tribe. Described as one of the last of the Rephaim, Og had an iron bed over 13 feet long, highlighting his colossal stature. The battle against Og was one of the most significant. Under Moses' leadership, the Israelites faced and defeated Og and his army. This victory reaffirmed God's promise to give the land to the Israelites and highlighted the need for continued obedience and trust in divine power. Og's defeat marked a turning point, significantly weakening the giants' presence in the region and paving the way for the conquest of Canaan. Another important example of the wars against the giants was the fight against the Emim and the Zuzim, mentioned in Genesis 14. These tribes were also known for their great height and strength, but like the Rephaim, they were defeated by the Israelites. Each victory over these giant tribes reinforced the Israelites' faith in divine protection and the certainty that they were fulfilling God's plan. Besides direct battles, the wars against the giants also involved strategic confrontations and the capture of fortified cities. The giant cities were well defended, and their fortifications posed significant challenges for the Israelites. However, with divine guidance and courageous leadership, the Israelites managed to conquer these cities, eliminating threats and establishing their dominance in the Promised Land. A notable aspect of these wars was how the Israelite leaders inspired their followers. David, in particular, played a crucial role in motivating and leading his people against the giants. His unwavering faith and personal victories, like defeating Goliath, served as an example and inspiration for his warriors. The courage demonstrated by David and his men showed that with God on their side, no force, no matter how formidable, could prevail. The wars against the giants also helped shape the national identity of the Israelites. Each victory over the Nephilim and their descendants not only solidified Israelite territory, but also reinforced the narrative that they were God's chosen people, destined to live in a land of peace and prosperity. The stories of these battles were passed down from generation to generation, serving as perpetual reminders of God's faithfulness and the importance of staying strong in faith. As the giants were gradually defeated and their tribes assimilated or eliminated, the threat they posed began to disappear. However, the memories of these wars and the challenges the giants imposed remained alive in the traditions and stories of the people of Israel. They served as lasting lessons about the ongoing struggle between good and evil, and the need to trust in God in all circumstances. The extinction of the giants marks a significant final chapter in the saga of the Nephilim and their descendants. As the Israelites continued to conquer and establish their presence in the Promised Land, the remaining giants were gradually eliminated. This process was both a series of military battles and a spiritual purification, symbolizing the eradication of the corruption and evil that the Nephilim represented. After the initial victories over giants like Goliath, Og, and Goliath's brothers, the Israelites faced other groups of giants living in the region. The campaigns led by Joshua were particularly effective in wiping out the giant tribes that still resisted in Canaan. Joshua, with his unwavering commitment to God and strategic leadership, managed to defeat many of these formidable foes, solidifying Israelite control over the land. The Anakim, for example, were one of the giant tribes that suffered great losses at the hands of the Israelites. As mentioned earlier, Joshua led campaigns that resulted in capturing their cities and eliminating their warriors. Hebron, one of the fortified cities of the Anakim, was taken and purified, symbolizing the victory of God's people over one of the last major threats from the Nephilim. Despite these victories, some remnants of the giants continued to exist in isolated areas. These last giants were eventually assimilated or destroyed during the Israelites' ongoing expansions and wars. The final victory over these creatures was not just physical, but also spiritual, as it represented the complete fulfillment of God's promise to give the promised land to the promised land, his descendants. Over time, mentions of giants in the Bible began to disappear, indicating that they had been almost entirely wiped out or integrated into society in a way that they no longer posed a significant threat. The stories of battles against the giants turned into legends and traditions passed down through generations, serving as moral and spiritual lessons. The extinction of the giants was more than the elimination of physical beings. It was the removal of a symbolic threat to divine order and justice. The Nephilim and their descendants represented corruption, violence, and rebellion against God. Their elimination marked the restoration of divine order and the reaffirmation of the Israelites' commitment to their God. These victories also strengthened the national and spiritual identity of the Israelites. The memory of the battles against the giants and the victories achieved with divine help became a central part of their cultural and religious heritage. The faith and obedience demonstrated in the battles against these formidable beings served as a model for future generations, teaching the importance of trusting in God and the constant fight against the forces of evil. The legacy of the Nephilim, though physically extinct, left deep marks on the history and culture of the Israelites and, by extension, on biblical tradition. The memory of these giants, children of fallen angels, and human women became a powerful symbol of transgression, divine judgment, and the battle between good and evil. The stories of the Nephilim and their descendants are told with a clear purpose: to teach lessons about the importance of obedience to God and the consequences of disobedience. The Nephilim represent extreme corruption, a forbidden mix between the celestial and the earthly that resulted in powerful but morally degenerate beings. Their existence and eventual extinction serve as warnings about the dangers of straying from divine commandments. The fight against the giants, like Goliath and his brothers, exemplifies the need for courage and faith to face seemingly insurmountable challenges. David's victory over Goliath in particular became an archetype of overcoming and unwavering faith. This story is still cited as an example of how trust in God can empower the weak to defeat the strong, the small to overcome the great, and the righteous to prevail over the unjust. Culturally, the Nephilim left a lasting mark on Judeo-Christian traditions and narratives. They are mentioned in apocryphal texts, such as the Book of Enoch, which further expand on their origins and the rebellion of the fallen angels. These texts provide a broader context for understanding the complexity of the relationship between the divine and the human, and the boundaries that should not be crossed. Theologically, the Nephilim are a constant reminder of God's power and justice. God's decision to send the flood to cleanse the earth, eliminating the Nephilim and their corrupting influence, underscores the seriousness with which God treats disobedience and evil. At the same time, the survival of Noah and his family represents God's mercy and faithfulness to those who remain righteous. The influence of the Nephilim also extends to symbolism and literature. They are often mentioned as examples of giants in various literary traditions, representing immense forces that challenge heroes. This symbolism is seen in mythologies and stories around the world, where giants frequently represent huge challenges and the struggle against evil. The legacy of the Nephilim teaches us about the dangers of pride and unchecked ambition. The rebellion of the angels and the creation of the Nephilim were acts of defiance against divine order, resulting in catastrophic consequences. These stories continue to serve as warnings against arrogance and the temptation to overstep the limits set by God. In the context of Judeo-Christian faith, the narrative of the Nephilim reinforces the need for humility, obedience, and trust in God. The ultimate victory over the giants and the restoration of divine order symbolize the hope that, even in the face of the greatest adversities, justice and goodness will prevail. Throughout this series, we've explored the fascinating and complex history of the Nephilim, from their mysterious origins to their epic battles and lasting legacy. The journey of understanding these biblical giants has led us to reflect on deep themes of faith, courage, and the ongoing struggle between good and evil. If you enjoyed this content and want to follow more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll stay updated on all our upcoming posts and continue to explore the wonders and mysteries of biblical stories. Also, don't forget to like this video if it brought you new insights. Your like is very important to us as it helps us reach more people interested in biblical and theological stories. And of course, we want to hear your opinions. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts on the Nephilim and the impact of these stories. What parts surprised you the most? How do you see the legacy of the Nephilim in today's context? Your participation enriches our community and promotes meaningful discussions. So subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave your comment. Together, we will continue to explore the depths of biblical history and learn valuable lessons for our lives. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.